Okay, good evening. And we'll put up the presentation, figure out how to do it. And we're reaching slowly towards the end. And we're now going to learn about the letter kuf. You know, I'm not going to give the run through. We'll do an experiment this week, okay, because we've done it many times. But let's just say that what we've learned is all the tens and all the units, and we said that tens are more spiritual than the units, but there's definitely a parallel between them. And now that we've gone to the letter kuf, we sort of until we're now at this point, we've sort of got an almost perfect world where we've got Hashem finding his way, so to speak, to influence us through all sorts of means, us or other means, other receivers, taking this affluence, finding out how to move it on, doing it in a balanced way. And now we move on to a very interesting letter called kuf. And what is the word kuf? Kuf sounds like the word kof, right? Which means a monkey. So this is something quite different to any of the letters, I think, that we've learned till today. We've spoken about the mouth, the eyes. We've spoken about Hashem's influence, about a kli, but now we're talking about a kof. What is a kof? So I think a kof, a monkey, is, that's what Rav Kook explains, it's the ability to imitate. Now, normally we think as a kof as something stupid, something funny, but actually the ability to imitate someone is a very, very important quality that all of us have. And apparently there's a piece of our brain, I'm not sure exactly where it is, that the whole purpose of that part of the brain is to imitate. Like, have you ever wondered why when somebody yawns, we also start yawning? Or somebody laughs, we all pack up laughing. Or I start talking, you all start sleeping. No. And the reason is that we come into this world and we know nothing. We're like a blank piece of paper. This is true for human beings even more so than for animals. You know, animals are born, they can already walk. They're all, a baby giraffe is almost like the mother giraffe. Within a few hours, it can walk around, and except for being small, it looks exactly the same. But a baby person, a human cub, as they say in the Jungle Book, can't do anything. Can't walk it, can't talk it, whatever. And that's because the human being has the ability to develop. And the starting point to know how to develop, in which direction to develop, is to know what to imitate. And as you know, as parents, we always try to set a good example. And it's not just another good thing to do, it's actually probably the most important means of education. Because there's this quality that human beings have, is ability to imitate. And of course, similar to the things that we've said in previous letters, you can take this to a positive and negative side. You can imitate bad qualities. An example is sometimes people are in a negative environment, and the famous saying in Hebrew, "Mani friar," I'm a sucker. Everybody else is cheating. I'm also going to cheat, and that's the taking that to a negative side. But actually, the quality in itself is not only a good quality; it's an essential quality for our development. So that is the main meaning, the main significance of the word kof, of the letter kuf. Something that I didn't know until I was reading up this week is that in Hebrew, apparently, the kof is also the little hole in the needle that you thread the thread through in order to sew. Did you know that? Yeah, okay, my wife knew that. I guess she sews more than I do. And I didn't see a significance in this, but just thinking about it logically, I guess what that does, that's the point that forces the thread to follow the needle. Okay, the needle goes into and out of the clothing, and by the thread following it, you mend the clothing, or you create the clothing. So the whole is what creates this ability to follow or to imitate. So maybe that comes from the same direction. Another word that comes from the same root is to lehakif, hakafa, is to surround. Okay. Now it's interesting. What is the connection between imitating and lehakif? I think we actually said this when we discussed the letter samech, which looks like a circle, right? And a circle encircles things. That if you imitate from all different angles, you'll get a circle. So the word hakafa, we know the word hakafot, right? In simchat Torah, we dance around the Torah, and we do hakafot. But it's also the Hoshanot, where we go around the Mizbeach on Sukkot. We know Jericho, they went around 7 times before the walls fell. There was also a custom to walk around the altar in the temple. And we know there's also hakafot in nature. There's the cycle of nature, whether it's the butterfly that goes through the cycle, or all different beings, the seasons that go through the nature. We have this idea of encirclement, of coming back to where you are. And the idea of encirclement is also imitation, right? You go back and you repeat the same thing over and over again. Okay, I think related to this also is something that's considered very important in learning Torah, is the need for chazarot. Okay, if you think you can learn everything once, you're missing the point. The Gemara talks about doing the difference between doing 100 chazarot, 100 learning revisions of your learning, or 101. I don't know anybody who does that today, but I know people who do 10 or 11. So those are the ideas of the word lehakif and kof and imitation. The numerical value, and this we know already because I made a big deal about, we finished the 10s, so I guess we've got to come to the hundreds. And that's 100. That's a big number. That's like, if we said 10 is unity, then 100 is global unity. Okay? Now, if we said that when we went from the units to the 10s, we went to something that was more spiritual, right? And we explained that if somebody is just worried about his own living, that's something that's very physical. But if you worry about the living of other people, of a group of people, that already turns it into charity or chesed, and it becomes more spiritual. And if you go up another level, it's even more spiritual. And in fact, in the Kabbalah, when it talks about there's 4 different worlds, and we're not going to go into it obviously today, but each world is considered to a different power of the 10s. Like the lowest world is units, the next world is 10s, the next world is hundreds, and the highest world is thousands. So now we're actually jumping up to a whole new level of looking. Now, if we look at Pekei Avot, right, if you thought last week was bad when we said ben tishim lashuach, that when you're 90, you bent over, and we actually explained that it's got a positive side to it, because at the same time, while you lasuach, you can also lasiach, you can also have your conversations. And what I tried to explain is that there's a positive spin in looking at aging. When our bodies get smaller and weaker, as long as our neshama in parallel is getting stronger and stronger. In other words, we're moving the balance. We're taking the sort of a preservation of matter, except we're moving our matter from physical matter to more and more spiritual matter. And if somebody gets to the age of 100, so it sounds very uncomplimentary. I don't even want to translate it, but I'll translate it verbally. Ben me'a ki'ilu meit, as if he's dead. Va'avar, and he's passed on. Ubatel min ha'olam, and he's not in this world anymore. And but I think, again, taking the same explanation that we said last week, it gives us a completely spin. In other words, he's in another world. His thoughts, if he's still alive, are in a far more deeper world. He doesn't get lost in the shtiyot, of the nonsense of this world. One other point of the of 100 is the idea of 100 brachot. There's a law actually mentioned in the Gemara, and it's actually brought in the Halacha, that a person may say 100 brachot every day. Now, brachot could be all types of brachot, right? We have the brachot that we say in the morning when we wake up. We say bracha on the Torah. We have the brachot for the Shema and in the Shmona Esrei. We have brachot when we eat. We have brachot after we eat. We have brachot when we go to the bathroom, or those that go to the toilet instead of the bathroom. We have all sorts of brachot. A person should strive to have 100 of these a day. Now, why 100? Why not 90? Why not 101? So one explanation I once heard from Rabbi Sabato here in Bethel was that we know that a person in the time of the temple, when we were more agricultural, we had to give 1/10 tithe of the crop to the Kohen. Today we separate something in remembering that, and please God, when the temple is built, we'll do it again. Now we have Leah and Ruth here, Moshavnikiyot, they can probably tell us more about that. But after you've taken the truma, and then after to give a tenth to the Levi, and sometimes to the Levi, sometimes to the to yourself to eat in Jerusalem. But the Kohen who receives the truma has to take a tenth of that and give it to the Levi, and it's called maaser mina maaser. And so if you've got 100 brachot, then the Kohen could take 10 and he could give 1. So at least you'll have 1 left over. Now, what is the deeper idea behind this is that I think the idea is saying that once you have the number 10, you've got such a complete amount that you've got enough to so to speak, to spread out, that you don't ever feel that you're lacking. You know, sometimes maybe someone who's a young couple or somebody who's poor and he goes to the makulet every time he goes, and every time he'll buy a chocolate or a bread or whatever, you know, he'll see how much it costs and he'll check the price, whatever. Somebody who's wealthy and he'll just go, and you know, and the saying sometimes the people are well off. So another 50 shekels won't make me rich or poor. Okay, there's sort of a level that you've got, so to speak, enough money where certain amounts are not going to make a difference to your life. And I think that's what the number 100 represents, that there's enough plenitude in these brachot, spiritual plenitude, that you've got enough to give away. You won't be at all missing if you give to the Kohen, you give to the Levi, you give to the poor person. I don't know anything specific about the sound of the kuf. Like with a lot of the letters lately, we don't have anything to learn about the sound. Moving on to the shape, 2 different explanations that are given in the books, and they're similar to each other. The message is the same. The one says that this is a letter kaf, and inside the kaf we have a vav. Now we've learned in the previous letters, we learned that the kaf is a kli, is a vessel, and the purpose of all vessels is to have a means to house, to hold the spirituality in this physical world, and also means to give it an expression, to allow it to influence in the physical world, because something that's purely spiritual, if a ghost comes into this world, there's not much you can do. But if that spirit is inside a body, you can do lots of things. And coming out of the vessel is the vav. And the vav, we've said many times, is the vav achibur, is the hamshacha, is the connection. Vav is and, it connects things together. A vav is also a hook that connects a picture to the wall. So here we have, if till now, we spoke often about the plenitude coming from above and being caught in the vessel, like the aleph and the bet, or the yud and the kaf. Here, it's already inside the vessel, and because we have so much, we can influence it further. A similar idea is with instead of a vav, you write here the nun sofit, okay, And the nun is the longest straight letter, which again symbolizes the hamshacha, the continuation, going all the way as low as you can. You know, it's giving this affluence to anybody or anything that needs it below you. We also said that nun, when we looked about nun, we said nun means fish. It's a connection between different worlds. We said fish were before the flood and after the flood. Fish are something in between animal and plants, because they grow and they procreate like animals, and they move like animals, but they don't need shchita. They don't need to be slaughtered like animals to eat them, etc. So the nun is also the idea of connection. There's very strong similarity between the nun and the vav, also obviously in their shape. In one of the books I saw, Zamira Cohen's book, he looks at the shape of the white inside the kaf. Now, if you remember when we spoke about the hay, we said the hay's got a little hole in the top and a hole in the bottom, but the hole in the bottom was very big. And we said that the hay represented this world where it's, if you don't control yourself, you can do tshuva and you can go up through the hole in the top, but it's very easy to fall through the hole in the bottom. But once we get to the kuf, it's similar to the hay, that it's got the hole in the top and the hole in the bottom, and you can move up and down, right? It depends what your intention is. It depends the direction. Are you moving up? The kuf is a means for growth, and in that case, you're doing an imitation of a good example. Or are you moving down through the kuf? In that case, you may be doing an imitation and following the what everybody's doing, which may be negative. So those are the two sides, but different to the hay, the hole at the bottom is very small. Okay, and I think this is because we're in the hundreds, we're in the more spiritual realm, and that protects you more. In this idea of another way of looking at being in the public realm or being protected is, let me give you two situations, right? A person is, I'm trying to think of he's in a hotel and he's really tempted to steal the bathrobe that they gave him. Now, if he's alone and nobody can see him and there's no security cameras, he may be tempted, okay? But if he goes into a public area, and there they have something, and everybody's walking around, and somebody will see him taking it, he'll automatically take back. In other words, somebody once made the comment that alavai, our fear of God should be as strong as our fear of man. Sometimes we're more concerned about what people will say to us than what Hashem will say to us. And that's an aspect of why the group, the more you go to the public realm, it keeps you on the right trend. I think there's another aspect of this which is related but different, and it's something that our generation, when I say our generation, I think even more our kids' generation than our generation, can appreciate more than any previous generation. And I'm talking about the generation of Wikipedia. Okay, I remember when Wikipedia, I'm sure you all do also, first came around, and a lot of us were very, very skeptical about Wikipedia. How can you have I mean, when we had Britannica and encyclopedia, the Talmudic encyclopedia and the Encyclopedia of Eretz Israel, people worked, professors, the top minds worked for years and checked themselves and developed it, and they sold these massive things, volumes of encyclopedias. And all of a sudden, you're making an encyclopedia where anybody can go in and change the content. How can that be accurate? And the incredible thing is that the most accurate encyclopedia that there is today is Wikipedia. Not just because people don't use it just because it's so accessible, which is also true, but just because that there's so many people accessing it and correcting it, that even if a percentage of them intentionally or non-intentionally mess things up, the klal, right, the greater public realm will put it in its right place. I think that's another example, another facet, if you like, of how the klal is more good, more spiritual than the prat, than the individuals. And the first word in the Torah that starts with the letter kuf is in the fifth verse of the Torah. Vayikra Elohim le'or yom ulechoshech kara laila vayere boker yom echad. In other words, the ability to call something, to give the name to something, is kara. And what does that mean? A name, a person's name is reflects who he really is. Okay, we have a book in the Torah, one of the 5 books of the Torah, called Shmot. Ve'elu Shmot b'nei Yisrael, and it lists a whole lot of names. Why is it so important to list the names? In the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, it talks about when the tribes, the children of Jacob, are born, and the giving of the name. And the first son is called Reuven. And Reuven comes from the word Reuv, see, ben, okay, which reminds us of the ayin that we learned 2 weeks ago. And the second son is called Shimon, from the word Lishma, which reminds us of the dibur, of the pair that we spoke about last week. But there the Gemara says, Leah, when Reuven's born, he says, Ru'u ma ben beni u ben chamoti. Look at the difference between my son and Esav, my brother-in-law. Look what a difference there is. And we see that there's a big significance in the name. Avram couldn't have children, and Hashem changed his name to Avraham, and he could have children. Same with Sarai and Sarah. In other words, something happens when a person gets his name. And what the explanation is that a name is the reflection of the pnimiut, of the inside of a person. Now, there seems to, if you look, I'm not going to go into the details now, but if you look into that Gemara itself, there seems to be 2 different views. One view says that the Leah had some sort of Ruach HaKodesh. She knew what Reuven's neshama was, and therefore she gave him a name which matched his neshama. But there are other sources that say that when the parents give a name to the baby, there's actually a little part of the neshama that only comes down after the name is given. And the name actually influences the person. But either way, whether the name influences the person or the person influences his name, or maybe it's a little bit of each, there's definitely a reflection, an echo of the name and the personality. In other words, there's an imitation, a reflection, an imitation of the name to the actual thing we're talking about. Okay, there's lots more to say on names, and I'm biting my tongue to hold off because I think the point's been made, and this isn't a shiur about names. Let's see a couple of other points, and then we'll try to sum this all up in one idea. So our young kids who, in the Gemara and Shabbat, who talk about the different, the meanings of the letters, here it's very, very short. They say Kof, Kuf, stands for Kedush, for Kadosh. Okay, so obviously the same word as Kuf is Kadosh, and Kedusha, holiness. It's interesting that the same word, like we've seen many, many times in the series, and it's true in Hebrew, the same word that's very positive, Kadosh, is probably the ultimate goodness, can be negative because the word Kadesh, or for feminine Kadesha, means a prostitute. You can get a male or female prostitute, and that's word used in the Torah, Lo Tieh Kadesh or Kadesha B'Am Yisrael, and that's taking the physical aspect of a person and using for the most lowly side. On the other hand, you can take the same attraction between the sexes and put them together and create a marriage, which is called kiddushin, the same word. In other words, depending on what you do with the word kedusha, you can put them, you can create a chikui, a imitation that's good, or an imitation that's bad. So just we'll spend a little bit of time looking more at the word kadosh, seeing these kids spoke, said that the kuf stands for kadosh, and maybe we'll also then try to understand why is this, there's lots of words that you could have written with kuf, why did they dafka say the word kadosh? So first of all, the next thing is the pasuk, the verse says in the Torah in Vayikra, kadoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani. In other words, if we really want to be kadosh, it's not that we kadosh because we've suddenly been motivated. It's not because we kadosh because we think we're something. We're kadosh, the source of us to have the ability to be spiritual, to be something, comes from the fact that we've got something inherited from Hashem. In other words, inside each and every one of us, there's a seed, a very deep seed, that's Hashem's mouth, right? The Torah talks about Hashem breathing him, part of himself, so to speak, into us. That is the Kedusha. So what we're really doing is when we're trying to be more spiritual, we're trying to actually bring ourselves, reveal our inner selves. The Hasidim in the second parsha and third parsha in the Torah, Parashat Lech Lecha, that talks about Abraham giving the commandment to leave Mesopotamia and come to Eretz Israel. And he says, according to the Pshat, it means Lech Lecha. Walk, you must walk. But the Hasidim said, if you look literally at the word, it means Lech. We learned when we did the letter Lamed, Lamed means to. Walk to yourself. In other words, Avraham Avinu, when he was coming to Eretz Israel, and when he was starting his whole project, so to speak, of creating the Jewish people, he was coming towards himself. In other words, he was revealing his inner self outside. That's the that's the idea of Kedusha. And when we talk about Masoret, people talk about Masoret is tradition, so it's a nice, sweet thing to do what my Boba made kreplach, I'm going to make kreplach, and that's what tradition is. That's not tradition. Tradition is when we take something that we've received from our fathers or from our rabbis, who received from their fathers and from their fathers, because that ultimately comes from Hashem. That's actually revealing who we really are. And that explains a saying in the Talmud that says, "Omer davar b'shem omro mevi geula le'olam." If you say something and you quote it, you heard something from another person, something positive, and you say it in his name, you bring redemption to the world. And the same Rav Sabata that I quoted earlier, he once said, why redemption? Why does it say you bring goodness to the world, you bring happiness to the world? Why dafka redemption? And he said, because when you say something in the name of the person you heard it from, and he'll say it in the name of the person he heard it from, eventually you'll get back to Mount Sinai. Eventually you'll get back to the source, right? And the source, that is the redemption of the world. Okay, when we talk about repenting, what is the word in Hebrew? Lasot tshuva, right? You go back to, where do you go back to? You don't go back in the past. You go back to who you really are. You go back to your inner self. So that's the idea of Kedusha. Before I move on, I want to just say that I think this again comes to the idea of this imitation. In other words, when we're imitating, when we're doing this Kedusha, we're actually trying to imitate Hashem. Kedoshim to you, the Ramban brings it, it's in the Mishnah of Torah Kohanim, Prushim to you, af mina mutar. Okay, if you want to be Kadosh, this is something that's not everybody knows, but everybody knows that there's mitzvot. And you do the mitzvot, you're good. And you avoid doing the nunus of the mitzvot, the nose, and you're good. And that's all that's expected for you. But that's not liot kadosh. Liot kadosh is to take something that you're allowed to do. Right? You're allowed to eat kosher food. You got some kosher food. But don't eat it like a pig. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that you're not allowed to eat like a pig. It says you can't eat a pig, but it doesn't say you can't eat like a pig. But there's a no to limit what's permissible to you, and that makes you kadosh. So it's interesting that this kof, this kedusha, comes after the tzaddik. Okay, we spoke about the tzaddik last week. And in order to attain the kedusha, you have to first go through the level of being a tzaddik. Now, tzaddik doesn't mean an absolute tzaddik. I don't know, each of us has got the picture of the tzaddik that we picture, these special people that are almost superhuman people. I'm just talking about doing the right thing, by being a tzaddik, being the right thing. And the point I'm trying to get to here is that, especially in our generation, second time I'm mentioning our generation today, there's a tendency to try and take shortcuts, right? We often call the instant generation, right? The generation that grew up on warming up pizza in the microwave, because it's, I remember the first time I went to America, and I was with Nechama, and we didn't have a microwave then. And the people who were hosting us, I was there for work, and Nechama joined me. And the people who were hosting us bought some pizza. They went to the pizza shop, we brought some pizza home from the kosher pizza. And then they put it in the microwave to warm up. And we hadn't seen this before. And they said, yeah, we put it in the microwave, then we go do netilat yadayim. By the time we come back from netilat yadayim, it's ready already. And we were amazed. Wow, you know, we used to put it in the oven and waiting, 10 minutes till the cheese melts. And this is the generation where we used to getting everything instant satisfaction. And it's got a lot of benefits, but it's also got a problem. And the problem is that part of our growth in this world is exactly that word, the word growth. In order to really attain something, you've got to work for it. You've got to grow through it. And it's interesting that Rav Kook, in an article that he wrote probably about 110 years ago called Ma'amar Hador, and he writes about his generation, way before there were microwaves, he said that the problem with this generation is that they're trying to achieve, to reach Yerushalayim Shel Mala, Yerushalayim in the heaven, without going through Yerushalayim Shel Mata. In other words, if you want to achieve holiness, you want to achieve something, you got to work. You got to invest in yourself. There's no magic that you do. You put money in the tzedakah box, and all of a sudden you'll be a good person. There's work that you got to do on yourself. And that is the message why the kof, the kedusha, comes after the tzaddik. First you got to work. First you got to work on yourself. I'm not saying we have to be a tzaddik like whatever, these great tzaddikim, but do be a tzaddik that each of us expects from us, and then afterwards we can reach our level of kedusha. Just two gematrias that enhance what we already learned. We don't base our whole belief on the gematrias, on the numerical values, but they can give us some enhancement. The word kof spelled out is, as the numerical value is 80 plus 6 plus 100 is 186, which is the same as the numerical value of the word makom. The mem is 40, so the two 40s are 80, it's 180, and 6. And a makom, you know, when we say in the kedusha of Shabbat, mimkomo hu yifen berachamim v'yachonam, can we call Hashem makom? Makom means actually space. Why is Hashem called space? And the Gemara says that Hashem doesn't need space. Space is where somebody, we physical people need somewhere to stand on, others we can't exist. But Hashem is hu makomo shel olam. He's the space of the whole world. And the Maran explains it in their word, I think you'll like this one, that the word makom comes from the word kiyum. Okay? Because when a person stands on a place, that place is mekayemator, it gives him his existence. But Hashem is the kiyum shel olam. And our kiyum is to do this imitation, is to be the kof of the makom. And finally, if we split the words, the letters of kof, we take the vav. Sorry, we take the shape of the. We said that the shape is a kaf and a vav. that spells 26, which is Hashem's name. Okay. But if we take the letters Vav Pei of the Kof, as we spell it out, it spells Hashem's other name, which is Elokim. So we have the name of Hashem, which is mercy, and the name of Hashem, which is justice, these two opposite aspects of Hashem. And the two of them come together in the word, in the letter of Kuf, of this imitation. So how does all this relate to Kedusha? Like I said earlier, because how do we achieve our specialness? We don't have to look far. We don't have to go to the monastery. We don't have to go to Tibet. All we have to do is to, as John Burks used to say, you got to bring yourself towards yourself, right? You got to find out what is your inner self. And your inner self is that spark of Hashem that's in you, and then you got to imitate it. So that is what the Kedusha is. The Kedusha is the Kof, is the imitation to copy the positive side. So you can take the Kuf, the hole inside the needle, and use it to thread things together, to bring the world together into a proper place. You start seeing then that everything is connected together. Everything is a cycle. Everything repeats itself over and over again. And that's what happens at 100, right? You have a cycle of 1, a cycle of 10, a cycle of 100. One of the mashalim, for those of you from South Africa, you may remember the Top Star Drive-In Theatre. I don't know if it was called a theatre. Okay, there was a drive-in movie house, or not a house, theatre, where we used to go in the old days and sit in our cars and plug the speaker onto the window and watch a movie on the big screen inside the car. Now, this particular one was on top of a little hill, and it was far too steep to drive up the hill. So this hill had a round road that used to go round and round and round and round. Eventually you got to the top. That is this hakafah. You don't just go around, but every time you go around, you're slightly higher than you were before. And you go around, you're slightly higher. So you're imitating, you're repeating what you did before. You're just doing another round, but each round is bringing you closer and closer to the Kedusha, to who you really are. And if we do that, right, we can take we reveal inside our kli, inside our inner selves, inside our bodies, the Kedusha, and then we can influence out with the Vav or the Nun. And that will give us the Kriya, the name, that who we really are. If we understand who we really are, what our name is, what our shame is, what they're going to call us, okay? In Hebrew, you don't say Ma Hashem Shecha, you don't say what's your name, you say Ech Korim Lecha. How do we call you? That's the significance of the name. So, Bezrat Hashem, we'll zoche to Mekayem the letter Kuf. Thank you.